I will now introduce Keyrsten McEwan.
Hello, 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 everybody. Ed, you can hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome, thank you. Just before I start talking for a long time, that's good to confirm. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so happy that so many of you were able to join us. The current global pandemic has resulted in such significant changes in our behavioral patterns, our usual day-to-day functioning, as of course we're all experiencing. In talking to students in the past couple of months, it became evident that we needed to put together some sort of a resource to address the issues stemming from this pandemic. So we've organized some information that I hope will help you as individuals to take care of your own health and well-being during this time. I also hope that it will help you as holistic nutrition students navigate the new reality that your volunteer clients face and be able to put together meaningful nutrition plans that address the areas of concern that your clients may have at this time, while also being mindful of the limitations that this situation presents. Initially, we had planned to have one single webinar, but as we started to discuss all of the ideas we wanted to present, it became glaringly obvious that we needed two webinars to cover everything. If you know me from class at all, I always have way more information than I have time for. So, oh, hang on one sec here. Okay, so part one agenda today, we're going to first talk a little bit about scope of practice and legality, particularly around the appropriate language that we should be using around a pandemic such as COVID-19. We're going to talk a little bit about where to find credible information. As I'm sure you've all seen, there's so much misinformation floating around out there that can be very misleading. So I'd put together a list of resources that can assist you in doing your fact checking and ensuring that the information you're presenting is credible and reliable. We're also going to talk about virus and immune system review. So what is a virus exactly? The word is so frequently used these days that I think it's important to kind of just go over what that means. So many of our clients, so few of our clients will have any understanding of what a virus is. I also want to touch on some immune system basics as a short review. I always feel like once we have a good understanding of how the immune system works, it then becomes really evident how to best support the immune system. We're going to touch on nutrients needed for a healthy immune system and the role of phytochemicals. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into some specific vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals important for immune system function. I think we really want to be able to understand how these nutrients actually work in the body really clearly, over and above knowing that, say, vitamin C is just good for the immune system. And then we're also, to wrap things up, going to touch on the gut immune system connection. When we're talking about the immune system, in my opinion, we absolutely need to talk about the gut as well. More and more research is teaching us about this really important connection. As we know, there are immune system components throughout the entire body. But about 70% of immune system activity actually happens in the gut and is largely controlled by the bacteria that live there. So to me, we can't talk about one without talking about the other. In part two, we are going to talk about mental health implications of a global health pandemic, how things like loneliness and social isolation can impact this. We're going to discuss some ideas about how to stay connected during these very strange and crazy times. We're going to touch on some adrenal support and nervous system support. You know, one of the main conversations that I've been having with clients over the past 6 weeks or so has been about these higher levels of stress these days that people are experiencing, whether it's from financial, family related, or just, you know, this heightened overall anxiety due to what's happening in our world these days. So one thing that I feel like we can really work on as nutritionists is ensuring that our stress mechanisms are working optimally to create this sense of balance, which is always important, but especially so right now. We're going to talk about encouraging movement and then also the logistics of healthy eating during a pandemic. So again, as we've all experienced, our normal routines are totally thrown out the window. So how do we create consistency in our new normal? How to survive the grocery store, educating clients on home cooking and food preservation, pantry staples, and so on. So that's going to be part 2. And as I said, we had so many ideas about what we wanted to put into this resource that we decided to split it up into 2. So we're going to dive right into scope of practice and legality concerns. The current pandemic presents unprecedented times for the natural health and nutrition industries. And, you know, I kind of look at this as, in a weird way, a really good thing, because the great thing here is that people are thinking about their health and well-being right now, maybe more than they ever have. And we as nutrition professionals have such a great opportunity. We have such a plethora of great information to share that can help our clients move towards the best, healthiest versions of themselves. So I really look at this as an opportunity for us. But we want to be really mindful of how we're presenting that information, so as not to step outside of our scope of practice, and also to keep our clients' expectations really well managed. We want to avoid the use of language outside of the nutritionist scope, so heal, treat, cure, prevent, diagnose, etc. This is something that we're doing anyways, but we want to ensure that we continue to be mindful of using proper terminology. A really great resource for this, as I'm sure many of you know, is your nutritional symptomatology textbook. In the beginning of the nutritional symptomatology textbook, there is a section all about scope of practice, legality, and terminology. So that's a really great reference for you around this topic as well. We do not want to make any claims regarding any foods, any beverages, or any supplements. And specific to the pandemic, we don't want to promote anything specific to COVID-19. And honestly, we just really don't have the research anyways at this point to know if something specific will have an impact on this specific virus at this point. We also lastly want to be really mindful not to share anything that could have a direct impact negatively on public health efforts. So it needs to be clear that everything we're recommending is in addition to the recommendations from our local public health authorities. So nothing we recommend is in lieu of social distancing, washing hands, proper hygiene, all of that stuff. So what can we do? We want to discuss nutrition with anyone seeking nutritional information, answer questions relating to the health of various organs, tissues, and body systems, such as the digestive system. We can provide advice on how to build and maintain overall health. And we can discuss normal body physiology and the nutrients required for maintenance of normal physiology. Really what we want to accomplish is to set the body up for success as best we can, to give it the right ingredients and remove the barriers so that it can do what it's got to do. So again, this is not new, but we want to avoid discussing a specific disease in detail. So this is anything from type 2 diabetes to heart disease to autoimmune diseases to diagnosed allergies, etc. This also includes COVID-19. So if this topic comes up in your discussion with a volunteer client, we want to then shift the dialogue to refer to body systems instead, and discuss how to optimize that body system's health and function. So we can discuss promoting a healthy immune system response. We can talk about encouraging a healthy gut microbiome. We can discuss reducing toxic load, optimizing liver function, and we can talk about ensuring one has healthy mucosal linings and epithelial cells in the respiratory system. So all of these specific discussions are absolutely within our scope of practice and will probably help to answer some of our clients' questions about what they can be doing to try and stay healthy during these times. So as I said, so much weird, wacky misinformation out there. So I wanted to just touch really quickly on where to find reputable information and to remind you to be discerning. So not everything you hear about or read is actually going to be true or credible. So a few basic things, your province's Center for Disease Control, your province's government websites, your municipality's website, the Government of Canada website, and the World Health Organization websites. All of these are going to be updated regularly with information related to COVID-19. So this is sort of your baseline and the first place to look for credible information about the pandemic. Additionally, your nutritional literature research course is a great resource for anything to do with research, obviously. So if you're not there yet, but you have the materials, definitely pull that out and look through. When you're looking for information online or to back up a statement, you always want to look for peer-reviewed articles. And these are going to be found mostly on PubMed.com. So any journal that's found in this database will be considered peer-reviewed. And this, it basically just ensures a sound scientific basis. It's sort of the holy grail of research, really. So peer review just means that an article will have a number of scientists review the article to ensure that there are multiple perspectives, different inputs to counter bias and identify any other issues with the research. I've also included a short list here of other credible science databases that you may reference online. And then if you're just sort of cruising the internet, looking for websites that end in .edu, which would signify an educational institution, .gov, which would signify a government website, or .org, a not-profit. And generally speaking, those websites are going to be more credible and reputable than something that's just like a regular .com or .ca website. Not always, but generally. So hopefully that helps give you a little bit of a refresher on where to find good information about the pandemic and anything really. So moving on to our immune system review. So a few basics. Obviously, the immune system is a complex, sophisticated network of organs, cells, and proteins. And I always think it's so amazing that when our immune system is working well, we don't even notice it. And I try to every day stop and have a minute to think about all of the crazy things that are happening in your body that are, maintaining homeostasis and keeping you healthy. And of course, the immune system is a really, really big part of it. And when the immune system isn't working very well, as we've all experienced at some point, I'm sure, we certainly don't feel very good. So the immune system's main job is to protect our body from invaders. So think of it as the body's natural defense system, our personal military, our #1 protector against pathogens. And the immune system works to neutralize and remove these bacteria, viruses, parasites, whatever, that enter the body, recognize harmful substances that we encounter in our environment, and fight against our body's own cells that have been changed due to damage of some kind. So the immune system really has two goals: addressing issues inside of the cells and attacking infections outside of the cells. And of course, problems are going to arise when the immune system isn't able to perform its duties. So leukocytes, really key part of the immune system. They are responsible for destroying pathogens that can create infection. So viruses, bacteria, parasites, and so on. Leukocytes are produced in the bone marrow, and they're stored in different places throughout the body. They're stored in the bone marrow, in our lymph nodes, in our spleen, and so on. And they circulate the blood and lymphatic vessels, which parallel the veins and arteries, looking for invaders. When a leukocyte finds a target, they begin to multiply and send signals for other cells to start doing the same. So they're really important communicators in the body and in the immune system. There are two basic types of leukocytes. We have phagocytes. The most common type is a neutrophil, and these cells sort of chew up invading organisms. And then we also have our lymphocytes. Two main types here are B cells and our T cells. And these are the cells that allow the body to remember and recognize previous invaders and help the body to deal with them. You'll hear the word antigen a lot, and really an antigen is any substance that sparks an immune response. Often it's a pathogen of some kind, a bacteria, a virus, fungus, parasite, etc. But sometimes it is one of the body's own cells that is faulty or dead. So an antigen, anything that sparks an immune response. And once this immune response is sparked, a range of cells are going to work together to recognize the antigen as an invader, and that cascade of immune system processes begins. So when a B cell spots an antigen, it begins to secrete antibodies. And our antibodies are special proteins that lock onto these specific antigens. And they're part of a large family of chemicals called immunoglobulins, which I'm sure you've heard of. So common immunoglobulins are IgA, IgG, IgE. Often they come up in the discussion around allergies, but are important for so many other immune system processes in the body as well. One B cell might make an antibody against a bacteria that causes pneumonia, and another might recognize the common cold virus. So there's special proteins that lock onto specific antigens. So it's a specific immunity. And the really great thing about our immune system, this part of the immune system, is that once an antibody has been produced, a copy remains in the body, so that if that same antigen appears again, the idea is that it will be able to be dealt with efficiently. So antibodies are going to lock onto the antigen, so that substance that sparks an immune response, and mark it for death. Then the T cell comes in to kill the antigen. There are two main types of T cells. We have helper T lymphocytes, and they essentially are going to coordinate the immune response. And there are two main types here. We have our Th1 effector cells and our Th2 effector cells. And then we also have our killer T lymphocytes. These attack cells and are particularly useful for fighting viruses. So they work by recognizing small parts of the virus on the outside of the infected cell. And the idea is then they would destroy that infected cell. We also have some built-in immunity, which includes the skin. So I think we always forget about the skin and its important role in our immune system. The first layer of defense against external pathogens. The skin also, and there's more and more research coming out about this now that's super interesting. The skin has its own microbiome and also contains on our skin topically, we have both innate, so our built-in immunity, and adaptive immune cells. So it just goes to show you how important the skin actually is in the health of our immune system. We have mucous membranes in the throat and gut, which are meant to sort of trap pathogens. And then we have some other cells, macrophage, neutrophils, our first line of defense against infection really, our dendritic cells, which direct those T cells and B cells that I just talked about to their targets, and then our natural killer cells. So these are our sort of, I would say, rapid response cells that attack viruses, among other things. So just kind of quick review on the immune system. Again, your nutritional symptomatology textbook is a great, just sort of short overview of the anatomy and physiology around your immune system. So what is a virus? As I mentioned a minute ago, it's like probably the most commonly Googled word these days, but so many people don't actually know what a virus is. So a virus is an incredibly tiny particle. And this is something I actually learned a few days ago, is that it's so tiny, it's only 1/1,000,000th of an inch, and I can't even fathom how small that is. So tiny, tiny little particles that require special microscopes to even be seen. So the interesting thing about viruses is that they can't reproduce on their own. They're the ultimate parasites, meaning that outside of a cell, a viral particle is inert, and it needs a host cell in which to live and replicate. So a virus, different viruses have different makeup and different structure, but there are a couple of similarities between all viruses. The first thing is that includes a genome, so some sort of genetic structure. It can be DNA, it can be RNA, it's often RNA, it can be single strand, it can be double strand, but there's some sort of genetic material, and there's also a protein shell. Sometimes you'll see that protein shell also referred to as a capsid, and this keeps the viral genome safe. It helps the virus to latch onto cells and also enter and infect the cell. So coronaviruses, herpes viruses, and many other common viruses are also, they have a third part to them called an envelope. So this is an additional layer around the protein shell. It's kind of like a greasy, fatty layer, and it has been stolen from the last cell that they infected. And this type of virus despises soap because it disrupts that additional greasy layer. So I was reading an article the other day, and they likened this to like garlic for a vampire. So it really just disrupts the functioning of that virus. Unlike human cells or bacteria, viruses don't contain the enzymes needed to carry out chemical reactions. And for this reason, as I mentioned, a virus must find a host cell in which to live and replicate. So for this reason, there has been much controversy over the years as to whether or not a virus is actually alive. Is it living or non-living? Now most scientists agree that a virus is alive, but only because of what happens after they infect a host cell. As I mentioned, when they're not infecting a host cell, they're inert. So just to kind of go over how this whole process goes, so the virus can enter the human body through a number of different ways. So the eyes, nose, mouth, skin, etc. Once the virus is in the body, they're going to look for that host cell to take over. The virus attaches to the host cell, releases genetic instructions into the host cell. Now, this injected genetic material recruits the host cell's enzymes. As I mentioned, a virus doesn't have enzymes itself that contribute to its function. The enzymes that it recruits from the host cell then make parts for more new virus particles. New viruses are formed, and then the particles break free from the host cell and continue to infect other cells. So that's just kind of like Cole's notes of how a virus actually infects a cell. So moving on to now, how can we help our client's immune system? So I think, in my opinion, they're a big piece of the puzzle. In fact, there are many missing puzzle pieces in all of the conversations around our health these days. So we need to educate our clients so they know that in addition to following the advice from our public health departments, there are so many other things we can be doing to stay healthy. These include nutrition, optimizing the digestive system and gut microbiome, lifestyle modification, managing sleep and stress, reducing exposure to toxins. And all of these things are things we can easily help people with. So again, I think there are a number of puzzle pieces that are missing. And again, a great opportunity for us as nutritionists and student nutritionists to kind of plug in and fill in the gaps and get the conversation started about these other things. So I'm going to go over a couple of really basic things. This is not rocket science. These are not things you haven't heard before. But what I'm finding when I'm working with clients these days is that these basic things sometimes just aren't in place right now because our whole routine and schedule has been disrupted. So proper hydration, obviously super important for just overall health. But checking in with clients on this, especially as the weather is getting a little bit warmer in lots of areas, we want to aim for about 2 liters a day, maybe a little bit more if the client is active and as we come into the warmer months. As with everything we talk about, we want to consider quality. So, just a basic water filter to remove chlorine. And this piece is important always, but especially important when we're talking about the immune system, because chlorine is a natural antimicrobial, and that's why it's actually added to water to kill microbes in our water. But what can happen is it can impact the good bacteria that's found in our gut. And we'll be talking a little bit later about that gut immune system connection. So doesn't have to be just water. Things like broths, caffeine-free herbal teas, fresh pressed veggie juices, blended soups, smoothies. These can contribute to hydration in a big way. And the number one question I always get is, does coffee count? And I'm sorry, but no, it doesn't. So coffee does not count. It's dehydrating and it's a diuretic. And in fact, if you are consuming coffee, you should drink a little bit more water. So we also want to reduce sugar intake. Again, not new information, but honestly, one of the best ways to support the immune system is to reduce our sugar intake. Now, when I say sugar, I don't necessarily mean like sugar found in fruit or other natural sources. natural forms of sugar can actually give the body a little bit of a boost, paired with great for you things like fiber, vitamins, minerals. So what I'm really talking about here is processed sugar. Sugar consumption depresses the immune system for up to 5 hours. The amount of time, of course, depends on how much is consumed. But these effects can take place as soon as 30 minutes after the consumption of sugar and can last up to 5 hours. So sugar influences how our white blood cells work and how they attack pathogens and triggers inflammatory processes. The other thing I always think about with sugar is the nutrient depleting effects that sugar intake can have over time. So thinking about sugar as an anti-nutrient. So it really takes more resources to break down and get rid of sugar than we get from it, leaving us in nutrient debt. So maybe, if a client has really high sugar intake, this can be contributing to nutrient deficiencies, which would impact eventually how the immune system is working. Don't skimp on protein. So as we know, proteins are made up of amino acids. So those are building blocks to proteins. And amino acids build and maintain essentially all components of our immune system. So without sufficient protein, our immune system will not work properly. For most of us, it's not about increasing protein intake per se, but rather poor digestion of protein. We don't see that complete breakdown of those long protein strands into the smaller amino acid units. So this doesn't necessarily mean go out and eat a bunch more steak and chicken, but thinking about easier to digest proteins, so something like spirulina, collagen powder, bee pollen, bone broth. These are smaller strands of protein in some cases, such as with spirulina and bee pollen. They're actually free-form amino acids, which require very little, if any, breakdown by the body. We also may want to consider digestive enzymes, which of course, with the right enzymes in there, can help to break down dietary protein. So if we're recommending digestive enzymes for protein breakdown, we'll probably want to look for a product that has hydrochloric acid and or pepsin. So this is something you may want to consider, especially if you are seeing signs and symptoms of digestive system imbalance with your client as well. So we're going to move into some key nutrients that support immune function. Now, keep in mind, it is 100% possible for someone to be deficient in these key nutrients, even if they're eating lots of fruits and vegetables and doing all of the right things, so to speak. And in my mind, there are 3 key reasons why this might be. Number 1, poor digestion. As soon as we learn about nutrition and working with clients, the number 1 thing we talk about is digestion. Poor digestion, poor absorption of these minerals, and then also chronic stress. So I always refer to stress as a nutrient stealer. When we experience greedy, it uses up all of our resources. When we experience chronic stress, the body's priority is the stress response. And a lot of the body's nutrients are going to go to those processes first, potentially leaving not enough for other processes like our immune function. So if a client's diet appears sufficient, consider those things as possibilities. So maybe we're not digesting properly, maybe we're not absorbing nutrients well, or maybe there is a high level of stress, which again, at this point in time is very, very likely. We're also we're going to talk about a lot of dietary and supplement strategies today, but as always, all of these things might not be appropriate for you or for your client. So make sure that you're doing your research, you're thoughtful about possible contraindications, and as I always like to say, doing a cost-benefit analysis. Additionally, keep in mind that when we start to bring in a lot of immune boosters, particularly with supplements, this may be counterproductive for clients who have autoimmune conditions or who are taking immunosuppressant drugs. It doesn't mean these things can't be used, particularly with autoimmunity, but ensure you're working with that person's primary healthcare provider when you're adding these things in so that symptoms can be properly monitored. Typically, though, antioxidants found in food will be generally safe. So vitamin D, we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Same with zinc. Selenium, key antioxidant, work synergistically with zinc and our ACEs, gets incorporated into something called selenoproteins, which strongly influence inflammation patterns. Magnesium, when deficient, and as we know, really, really common nutrient deficiency, particularly depleted with stress. So deficient magnesium related to high C-reactive protein. So C-reactive protein is a low-grade inflammatory blood marker. And of course, when we have inflammation, we're going to be much more reactive to whatever comes our way. Our ACEs, key antioxidants and anti-inflammatory nutrients, more to come on vitamin C specifically. And all of our antioxidants work synergistically together, so keep that in mind. So getting antioxidants from food form is always going to be our #1 priority. And if you're supplementing with antioxidants, we always want to do a combination. Omega-3s, important immune system modulators. As an added benefit, they're also really great for hormone health and the stress response. So things like our cold water fish, chia flax, all that good stuff. And then lastly, folate, important for cell growth and repair, and also many immune processes. So increasing antioxidant status, often clients are very confused about this and how they can increase their antioxidant status, but it's really quite simple. It's really about consuming lots of brightly colored fruits and vegetables and plant foods. The vibrant colors of these fruits and vegetables generally will signify high amounts of antioxidant nutrients and phytochemicals. So our dark greens, so dark leafy greens are cruciferous vegetables. Microgreens I recommend a lot for antioxidants. The levels of nutrients in microgreens are 4 to 6 times higher than in the mature plant. So a great way to get a really big boost of antioxidants and enzymes. Dark greens are one of my favorite immune supportive foods. They are so readily available. They're inexpensive. We can often find them locally grown, which is an added bonus. Our dark greens are orange, yellow, red, deep purple. So all of those, again, darkly pigmented foods. Berries, bell peppers, beets, red cabbage. And then don't skimp on the spices. So things like garlic, onion, ginger, turmeric, other herbs and spices often have high levels of antioxidant nutrients as well. Sometimes I'll consider the addition of what I call functional foods. So something like a spirulina powder, goji berries or goji berry powder, camu camu powder, acai berries for an antioxidant boost in a more concentrated form, but without having to, the client having to take a bunch of pills, supplement pills. There are a couple of really great antioxidant scales to look for if this is a topic that you're particularly interested in. The ORAC scale is one, the Andes scale is another, and essentially these scales measure the available antioxidants in a particular food. So in a fruit, a vegetable, a spice, etc. That's a really great resource for more information on antioxidants. But to keep it really simple, combine lots of brightly colored plant foods. So I wanted to do a spotlight on a few specific nutrients and just sort of dig in a little bit deeper. And unfortunately, we don't have time to do this for absolutely everything. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin C, just because I found some really interesting research about these specific nutrients in the immune system. So vitamin D, I wanted to talk about particularly for those of us living in Canada. For a lot of us, a lot of the year is spent in snowy or rainy, dark gray conditions, and we just don't get the conversion of vitamin D on the skin that other places in the world do. So I think this is an incredibly important nutrient to be thinking about, especially as we're coming out of winter. One of the most commonly deficient nutrients is vitamin D, particularly again above the 49th parallel. It is an incredibly important modulator of both innate and adaptive immune system processes. It may also interrupt inflammatory cytokine production, which is incredibly important. 1,000 IUs is a great daily dose to start. This may not be enough for some, particularly those who are deficient and who are trying to increase their levels. So if you're suspecting that a client has vitamin D deficiency, it's always important to refer out for testing and more guidance from a doctor on this, because as we know, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it can accumulate in tissues, unlike some of the other nutrients like vitamin C or B vitamins, for example. So always, if you're recommending above 1,000 IUs, we always want to check in with a doctor and get some testing. So with deficiency, inflammation is going to be more common. The best source of vitamin D really is unprotected sun exposure. So 15 to 20 minutes a day when possible. Earlier in the day is better because we don't have as much of those potentially damaging UV rays. But we can get it from a few food sources as well, namely mushrooms, cod liver oil, and eggs. Again, if you're working with clients or you are in Canada, you may want to consider supplementation though. Zinc is a really, really interesting immune system nutrient. It's an essential trace element, meaning that the body can't produce it, but small amounts are incredibly important for overall health. Unfortunately, some studies show that up to between 15 and 25% of the general population may be deficient. Like with magnesium, I mentioned earlier, zinc is something that can get used up in the stress response. It is responsible for about 100 enzyme reactions. It helps prevent oxidative stress, which could otherwise knock the body's antioxidant levels out of balance and or damage DNA. A deficiency is associated with increased susceptibility to infection, as well as a decreased detoxification of bacterial toxins. It may also display antiviral activity. So some studies are showing that adequate zinc is needed to slow viral RNA replication. It can help regulate natural killer cell activity and mediate cytokine production, particularly away from those inflammatory cytokines. Zinc is fairly easy to get into the diet. So lots of sources I've listed there, both plant-based and animal-based. If you are supplementing, I recommend zinc picolinate, which shows better absorption rates. I've also seen some really great studies on zinc lozenges in particular. They might actually be more helpful because they provide local zinc exposure to like the throat and some of those mucosal tissues. More is not necessarily better with zinc. Higher doses may inadvertently create a copper-zinc imbalance. So we want to be careful not to throw off that, that gentle balance between zinc and copper. We also may want to consider things that are going to deplete us of zinc. So alcohol, refined sugar, stress, refined grains, oxalate-rich foods that can kind of displace zinc as well. So zinc is definitely one of my top supplement recommendations if I'm thinking about the immune system. And then lastly, nutrient spotlight on vitamin C. So as we know, it is a key antioxidant nutrient. Whenever someone says, I feel run down, I think I'm getting sick, the natural inclination is to get on some vitamin C, and that's a really great thing to do. It's important for natural killer cell and macrophage activity. It modulates cytokine activity, again, particularly away from inflammatory cytokine activity. It boosts the Th1 response. So it really supports the immune system in a number of different ways. It's readily found in lots of fruits and vegetables. Some of my favorite ways to increase vitamin C, again, without having to take a million like pill supplements, camu powder. Camu is a berry. It is possibly the highest food source of vitamin C, so that's a great addition to smoothies. I often also recommend rose hip tea, so taking dried rose hips, which you can get at any health food store, pairing it with rooibos tea for like a huge boost of antioxidants, and then again, your citrus, broccoli, all of that good stuff as well. So if you are recommending vitamin C supplements, I usually gravitate towards a liposomal vitamin C for a fast delivery system. So liposome is a tiny phospholipid vesicle that mimics the body's own cell structure. So it's thought that liposomal vitamin C can cross cell membranes better in a way that regular water-soluble vitamin C just would not be able to. So short of IV vitamin therapy, I'm finding liposomal vitamin C supplementation, it has the best result. So on top of our vitamins and minerals, I also wanted to talk about phytochemicals. And essentially, phytochemicals are a plant's immune system. So it would make sense if we're trying to strengthen our own immune system, that maybe we should incorporate phytochemicals. Again, this is going to happen naturally if we're eating more fruits and vegetables. The interesting thing about phytochemicals is that they're not quite as well understood as many of the vitamins and minerals. We know there are thousands present in nature, and there are even many more thousands in nature that haven't been identified or studied. And they seem to work really synergistically with one another in whole food form. I recently watched a podcast on this topic that was super interesting. It was with Dr. Mark Hyman, which some of you may be familiar with, and a Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's a functional medical doctor, probably one of the foremost functional medical doctors in North America. He's a great resource for this topic. He talks about phytochemicals as a way to actually rejuvenate the immune system, which he talks about as being even more important than just supporting the immune system. He says if we are just supporting an immune system, but it's an immune system that isn't well functioning, is that actually what we want to be doing? So yeah, he talks about phytochemicals as really being a way to rejuvenate the immune system. So if this is a topic that you're interested in, I would highly suggest looking for that podcast. It's on Dr. Mark Hyman's podcast. So I wanted to highlight a couple of phytonutrients, phytochemicals. Flavonoids is the first one I wanted to talk about. It's a large class of phytochemicals. So there are thousands of different flavonoids that we know of. And you'll sometimes see flavonoids referred to as vitamin P, so that's interchangeable if you happen to see that. And they carry out key functions in plants. So things like attracting pollinating insects, fighting against environmental stressors. They're broken down into several categories, and there's been a lot of controversy about the categories, which fits into which. Yeah, so lots of different thoughts around the different categories, but I've included a few here just so you can kind of get familiar with some of the names you might see. Isoflavones is probably the most common that you may have heard of, found commonly in soy. Anthocyanidins is another one that you may have heard of, occurring in things like wine and chocolate. Really interesting thing about flavonoids is they're often found in foods alongside vitamin C. So really, really great example of the wisdom of nature. So flavonoids and vitamin C together in whole foods seem to have an even greater effect. So flavonoids help to maximize the effects of vitamin C by inhibiting its breakdown in the body, so it's able to remain active for longer. So yeah, flavonoids seem to positively impact the body in many ways, but most importantly, they have the ability to regulate cell signaling. So kind of, and I think this is what Dr. Bland was talking about with the rejuvenation of the immune system. With phytochemicals is they have the ability to regulate cell signaling. So the ability to kind of work out the kinks in the communication system in our own immune systems. They have anti-inflammatory properties and neuroprotective activities, which I think is especially important at this time when so many of us are experiencing higher levels of stress. Next up is quercetin. So this is probably the most widely studied flavonoid and one you've probably heard of and probably can't find on the shelves right now. It's incredibly popular right now. It has potent anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects. It lessens the effects of oxidative stress in the body. It impacts leukocytes and other intracellular immune system signals. It's known to downregulate or suppress inflammatory pathways and functions, including some of the inflammatory interleukins. Quercetin you can find in so many different fruits and vegetables: onions, leafy greens, tomatoes, berries, broccoli, citrus, etc. One of the key places that quercetin is being studied is actually in buckwheat, a specific type of buckwheat. So I anticipate a lot more information will come from those studies in the future. It seems to be best combined with bromelain, so that naturally occurring enzyme from fresh pineapple. So if you're looking for a supplement, you always want to look for a quercetin and bromelain combination supplement, because the two work so much better together. I wanted to highlight a couple of other specific foods and supplements that have so much great research behind their immune system impacts over and above just these nutrients. So mushrooms, incredibly popular right now, and I don't mean magic mushrooms. I mean, you know, the medicinal kind like reishi, cordyceps, chaga, shiitake, etc. They have a number of active compounds that help with immune system function. So maybe associated with lower levels of inflammation, increased natural killer cell activity. They activate cytotoxic receptors. So basically T cells that recognize a specific antigen, and they are what is referred to as an immune system modulator. So they have shown the ability to both upregulate and downregulate immune system function as needed. And that's why mushrooms are often referred to as adaptogens, because they have this truly balancing effect. As a bonus, they also seem to have hepaprotective effects, so help support liver function. That's kind of all I'm going to get into on the mushrooms for now. There is so much more we have to learn about mushrooms, but the research we do have is incredibly promising about their effects on the immune system. One thing I would caution, although mushrooms are thought to be immune system modulators, I would use caution with large amounts, particularly when you're looking at supplements of mushrooms with autoimmune disease, or if someone is taking immunosuppressant medication, just because they're so powerful. A few other considerations: spirulina I have mentioned, in particular for its protein content, really easy to digest protein, provides a huge nutrient boost in a really easy to digest form. I almost like to think about spirulina as nature's multivitamin. It is considered an immune booster, so this is something you would avoid with autoimmune or immunosuppressant medications. Another quick little caution about spirulina is that it's very, very, very potent. It's very cleansing, so it can create a detox reaction, particularly for those who are more toxic, aren't eating very well. So you want to start small and really work up to those larger doses. Bee propolis. Bees create propolis out of tree resin and then use it to line the hives to keep germs and infection out. For humans, it kind of does the same thing, antimicrobial. There are lots of really great bee propolis throat sprays available, which increases absorption, as that can happen in the mouth, and offers localized protection. And obviously this should be avoided for those with bee allergies. Colostrum is a dairy-based product, so certainly won't be right for everybody. For example, if there's an allergy, or if someone's choosing not to consume animal products for religious or ethical or health reasons. Basically, colostrum is an antibody boost. So it's incredibly rich in antibodies and can increase something called secretory IgA, which when is in sufficient levels in the body may help prevent pathogens from adhering to epithelial cell receptors. And many people are deficient in secretory IgA. We can also work to boost secretory IgA by identifying and avoiding reactive foods. If you're consuming foods that you're allergic to constantly, this depletes our secretory IgA. So as with any dairy product, we always want to think about quality. So ensuring that you're doing your research and you're purchasing and consuming a high quality product. Allicin or garlic, long used for its antimicrobial properties. If you're using garlic, like fresh garlic, always making sure to crush the garlic and let it sit for a minute so all of those compounds can become active with exposure to oxygen. Melatonin, obviously an important hormone for good sleep, but it also maintains something called inflammasome production, so a process that activates inflammatory cytokines. And then lastly, elderberries, as with spirulina, immune boosting, so avoid with autoimmunity and immunosuppressant medications. But elderberries contain high levels of anthocyanidins, which are known to have immunostimulating effects. So for a healthy person, this would be an excellent addition for the immune system. So liver support, I know this doesn't always come up, not necessarily top of mind when we think about the immune system, but for me, it's really important to think about. It's important for the elimination of toxins. It also produces certain immune system components, particularly our complement systems. It's responsible for glutathione production, so our key master antioxidant. And lastly, if the liver is not working well, our lymphatics can get clogged up. And think about the lymphatics as kind of like the highway for our immune system. And I think the lymphatic system is so undervalued and not talked about enough. So we can stimulate the movement of the lymphatics. And this is important because unlike the cardiovascular system, the lymphatics don't have a built-in pump. So the cardiovascular system has a heart, but the lymphatic system doesn't have this built-in pump. So we need movement so that our muscles contract and push lymph through those vessels. So movement is the absolute best way to get our lymphatics moving. We can also do dry skin brushing or Epsom salt bath soaks. And really when I think about the liver, I think about two steps. Number one, we want to reduce toxin exposure. And this is a basic thing that we're already doing. We're already talking to our clients about in a lot of cases. So that's step number one, reducing toxin exposure, freeing up some energy for the liver to start regenerating and doing more important work. So second step is to add things that are going to improve liver function. So I've included some things here: turmeric, ginger, apple cider vinegar, lemon, our dark leafy greens, and our cruciferous vegetables. If we would like to supplement, some of my top choices are NAC and acetylcysteine. This is a precursor to glutathione. It's also really, really great for breaking down mucus. It's something called mucolytic. And of course, mucus serves a purpose. It traps pathogens, but once that happens, we want to get rid of mucus. And NAC is really, really great for breaking down mucus in the respiratory system. So great for respiratory health for this reason as well. EGCG or green tea extract, and then I3C or DIM. So both EGCG and indole 3-carbinol support liver detoxification. So those are kind of my go-tos for supplements. And then last topic here, gut and the immune system. As I said, we really can't talk about one without talking about the other. 70 to 80% of immune processes occur in the intestinal system, predominantly in the duodenum. This is where much of the gut-brain axis and hormonal modulation happens as well. So when we talk about the gut immune system connection, this is the area that we want to target, the duodenum. The gut bacteria help our immune system, immune cells develop and regulate which particles pass through the intestinal lining and into the rest of the body. So our intestinal permeability. We want the spaces between our cells in the intestinal lining to be small so that only completely digested food particles can pass through. And we want the spaces between cells to open and close as needed. Healthy gut flora also supports the body's ability to produce productive types of inflammation and dampens non-productive types of inflammation. And I always think about the gut as a parking lot. So we want we want as many of those parking spaces as possible to be filled with good gut bacteria, so that when bad bacteria comes through, it drives around, oh, there's no parking spots left, and then it just gets pushed through to the next section of the intestinal system. So we want to fill up as many of those spots with good, healthy bacteria. So probiotics are a huge topic, and obviously we can't get into tons of detail around them because of time constraints, but I wanted to talk about a few things with probiotics and addressing that gut immune system connection. So, I mean, one of the great things about probiotics is that they are one way that we can actually change the ecosystem of the gut. Number one, don't choose quantity over quality. As I mentioned, what we want to target here is the small intestine, particularly the duodenum. And this part of the small intestine is much more lightly colonized than the large intestine due to quick transit time. Still lots of bacteria colonization that happens here, but we don't need those mega doses of probiotics when we only are wanting to impact the duodenum. Because again, compared to the large intestine, there's just not as much colonization there. And we also want to think about strains. So the duodenum is largely colonized with lactobacillus strains. So bifido strains and other strains of probiotics are not going to be as effective because they're targeting areas of the intestinal system further down the GI tract. So we want to choose predominantly lactobacillus strains. We also want to look for human strain in this case, because in this case, we don't want bacteria to be transient through the small intestine. We want it to be able to actually attach to the mucosal lining in the gut. And we do see better outcomes with human strain for this. CFU numbers, if you're not familiar, stand for colony forming units, and every probiotic product will have a CFU number. And this is essentially telling you the number of viable bacteria per dose. So again, we don't need huge doses of probiotics like we do when we want the probiotics to reach the large intestine. So I would say somewhere in the 20 billion CFU range is all you really need for reaching the small intestine. And then, as always, do your research. You want to look for clinical research on an actual strain, not just the species. So for example, all lactobacillus strains don't act the same. Other ways to support the gut, including fermented foods. So of course, our sauerkraut, refrigerated pickles, kefir, kimchi. Some ferments will be more diverse in bacteria than others, but they will all contain enzymes, which is helpful in the digestive process, and organic acids, which help support the growth of good gut bacteria. We also don't want to forget about prebiotics and resistant starch, so our food for the healthy gut bacteria. These are fibers that can't be completely broken down by our own digestive tract and serve as food for the good bacteria in our gut. So things like green bananas, plantains, cooked then cooled potatoes, garlic, sunchokes, all of these great prebiotic, fiber-rich, and resistant starch-rich foods. 2 amino acids really important here, glutamine and glycine. So these 2 amino acids are really important in cell turnover of gut cells and in regulating intestinal permeability. So glutamine, raw cabbage, beets, adding cabbage to juices is great here. You think it would taste bad, but it's actually not so horrible. It's actually quite palatable. And then glycine can be found in things like bone broth, gelatin, collagen powder. Slippery elm, marshmallow root, aloe vera. These are all really great for calming and soothing the digestive tract. So if somebody seems to have a lot of inflammation, a lot of stuff happening, digestive symptoms, these can go a long way of just sort of soothing the GI tract. Zinc we talked about for the immune system, but it also helps to regulate intestinal permeability. So this is another reason why zinc is always top of mind for me here. And then avoiding gluten and food sensitivities, at the very least, tend to create inflammation along the GI tract. So that wraps up our content for today. I hope this has provided you with some strategies to support your own and your clients' immune systems. We've obviously covered a lot today, but remember, you don't have to do all of these things. Be thoughtful and mindful about where you choose to start. Pick a few things that resonated with you for yourself or for a client. Get really good at those things and then build from here. I always tell clients, don't underestimate the power of making small changes. Small changes add up over time and can be incredibly impactful with regards to our overall health. I think sometimes, I know I do this too, but I think sometimes our clients feel like they have to be doing something 100% of the time and perfectly or not at all. And that's just not the mindset we want to create. So making small, impactful changes over time really, I think, is the way to go in a lot of cases. So as always, I talk too much, but we do have a few minutes here. If you would like to continue to ask questions, keep them coming if you have them. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We know how busy life can be, and we so appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Keyrsten. This is Christine Armstrong I'm a lot of
How
you
are
have
you?
spoken. How are you? So we have had some
Looks
few
like
questions.
you've been busy.
I have been busy. Yes.
I
We've
didn't
had
look
some
as
amazing. We've had some fantastic questions.
good.
So we had one question about
Yes.
how much.
And you can just read them to me, Christine, right? Because I
Yep.
was not paying attention. Okay.
No problem. I've kept track.
Thank you.
So how much bee pollen do we use? Is that
Bee
something
pollen?
that we build up to sort of build up our use, or is it something that we're taking in small amounts at first?
Was it for bee pollen or bee propolis?
Bee, they said bee pollen, but I believe it is propolis that we are looking for.
So bee pollen, I will speak to both, I guess. Bee pollen is very, 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 very rich in enzymes. So like with spirulina, it's usually something I recommend starting with small amounts with and then increasing over time just to make sure we don't have a big reaction to it. So I would say for bee pollen, like maybe a quarter of a teaspoon and then working up to a teaspoon or two at the most. It's pretty powerful stuff, so you don't really need much. So like sometimes people freak out when they see the jar of bee pollen and it's like, $20 or something, but that will last you a long time. And then bee propolis, you only need like a couple of little sprays if you're doing the throat spray. Bee propolis does contain enzymes, but not quite as like super enzyme packed as bee pollen. So I would be a little bit less worried about that reaction from the enzymes with propolis.
So another question, Keyrsten, was how much water? And that's a big discussion we have in our area. How much? I can't possibly drink 2 liters of water. And I've always said, drink enough until your urine is almost clear and colorless would be a great indicator. But obviously 2 liters is the aim to make sure that we are getting appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the gold
hydration.
standard, I would say. There may be circumstances where a client can't drink that much, and then you just work with them to do the best you can. And I think I always look about things on a good, better, best continuum, right? So I always ask myself, is what we're planning to do better than what we were doing before? And if the answer is yes, that's amazing. So I would say just try and keep hydrated. I think the one thing I'll say about that is I don't love the idea of drinking when you're thirsty, because I think what I find happens with a lot of people is with chronic minor dehydration, sometimes our thirst mechanisms get a bit messed up and we're not actually getting those cues. Same with what can happen with our hunger. So I don't love the just drink when you're thirsty advice so much. But I would say at least 1 liter a day is what you want to aim for, 2 liters or more being sort of like gold star.
Great. Now somebody has mentioned something about social media. We're getting bombarded with social media, and I think earlier on in the presentation you were talking about consulting, authoritative, accurate, well thought out websites. So maybe recap that again.
Absolutely, and I totally know what you mean. I mean, even when I was doing research for this presentation and trying to decide what to focus on, like I was completely inundated with information, and it's really hard even for a professional to like weed through all of that. So I totally hear you and I totally know what you mean. I think just be discerning, really, and just don't believe everything you hear and that you read. take the time to seek out. I'm not saying that websites aren't great sources of information, but what you're looking for on a website is whatever the person is talking about, they're referencing. So do they have references at the bottom of the article? If you click on that article, does it take you to PubMed, right? So just sort of like taking the extra step, seeing if the statement is backed by research or an article. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. And honestly, if you haven't taken the nutritional literature research course yet, I think things will become a little bit more clear for you once you're through that.
I think when we were in the antioxidant section of the presentation,
Yes.
somebody brought up black and white sesame seeds to include in your diet. I think black and white could be part of the rainbow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I mean, there are foods that aren't like bright purple or green that are absolutely nutritious. I just sort of was thinking about like how we can, how I always break things down is like, how would I explain this really clearly and simply to a client who maybe doesn't have the same background information as we do? So I think when we're breaking down the antioxidant discussion with clients, if we just say, all you have to do is just eat lots of fruits and vegetables, try to get lots of different colors in there, they're like, oh, that's not so complicated. I can do that. But certainly, you know, like cauliflower is incredibly nutritious. And, you know, like, yeah, of course. But black and white sesame seeds, great. They also have those healthy fats, which is really important for hormone processes and nervous system, which we'll talk about in our part 2. So absolutely, great suggestion.
Okay. I think it's Ona Grant had talked about how on earth do we select a good multivitamin, and it's a complicated question because it also depends on your age and your health status too.
Mm-hmm. To be quite honest, I don't recommend multivitamins very often for a couple of reasons. I feel like if I'm going to recommend a supplement and somebody needs to take a pill, I try to be more targeted. Rather than just sort of doing an overall multivitamin. It can be helpful in cases where we suspect real nutrient depletion for sure, but I would almost gravitate towards something like a greens and reds powder versus a multivitamin, and that's easier to incorporate for a lot of people as well. The other thing with multivitamins is that sometimes they have nutrients in them that compete for absorption with one another. For example, like zinc and iron in a multivitamin doesn't really make that much sense because they're competing. When zinc is in the presence of iron, absorption is decreased. So I would rather do something like a greens powder or like a green fruit powder and then do an added zinc or an added vitamin C or something like that. That's more targeted. I hope that helps.
Also, the topic of mushrooms, and if you have a candida infection, is that recommended?
So I would say like newer grown mushrooms. So like if you're at the grocery store and you're looking at button mushrooms or cremini mushrooms, they can be problematic with candida. There is always a potential for the like medicinal mushrooms that we're talking about to impact candida, but I 99% of the time don't find them to be a problem.
And can you clarify human strain bacteria? Where does it come from?
Well, I'm not a lab technician, so I don't know how like it all happens, but so basically what we mean by human strains are strains that we know to be inherently found in the human gut. And those would have originated from human feces at some point. How that all happens in the lab, I do not know, but that's what I mean by human strain. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Now, I think Mariana sent me a question, how much and how long should we take it? I'm assuming she's referring to probiotics.
For probiotics, totally depends on the person. If you are wanting to just like in the short term right now, say like improve the immune system, maybe a few months is sufficient. Studies do show that once probiotic supplementation ends, depending on the types of strains and the quality of the probiotic, those organisms will only remain in the gut for maybe up to 12 weeks. So if there are significant issues with digestive and intestinal health, it may be a much longer term thing. So I think the question is this more of a maintenance, like optimizing health thing right now? Or is this something that we're using to really target a specific health issue? And that can kind of help you determine if it's more of a short or long-term thing. But you really just have to look at that on an individual basis and what someone's symptoms are like.
I think too, it's also a good idea to really switch that probiotic up so you don't stick with one brand and just sit there and take it over and over again. It's a really great idea to switch the strains around as well.
Absolutely. And I think, that's why the multi-strain products are really helpful, because they more closely resemble what our gut looks like, right? Like we don't have one strain of lactobacillus probiotic, culture in our gut. We have, many different types of probiotics in the gut. And then yes, rotating them can also be helpful too.
So we also now have a question on the water quality, and it's that whole, tap water versus reverse osmosis. There's some pros and cons to those choices.
And this is really just something that I think, this is totally opinion based completely. I like filtered tap water because I think that we just remove the chlorine and any potential toxins. But then we get minerals, which I think is important. So that's kind of my go-to, is just filtered tap water. There are definitely pros and cons to something like reverse osmosis or like alkaline water. But I think, in terms of compliance too, just get any basic filter, like a Brita filter or a Santavia or whatever. And that will remove really everything we need to remove from water.
Okay, and Carol has asked if we can repeat the names of the antioxidant scales.
Yeah, do you know what I'm going to do? Type it in the chat box too, so everyone can see that in the replay. So the Andy scale and the ORAC scale are the two. So they're a little bit different, but basically what they're measuring is the amount of antioxidant activity in a food.
Okay, that's what I've got so far. If anybody has any more questions, please
Awesome.
type that in the dialogue box.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around. It is 12:15, so that's kind of the time we had said we would wrap up. So if people do need to leave, I know everyone has stuff to do. So feel free to get out of here if you need to. But I'm happy to stick around if there are any other lingering questions at all. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to join us. We really value your time and attention, as I said.
Christine, I'm not sure if you guys got this one particular question from, it was with regards to a PDF. Okay, can we get this via PDF? That way is more helpful.
That discussion is happening, so we're not sure. It is being recorded, so the recording will be provided, and we're looking into the possibility of providing it, but there's no guarantee.
Like doing the slides in PDF? Is that
right.
The question? Okay. I'll leave the tech to you guys. I don't know. Oh, I see one more. Dose the melatonin. I think is melatonin safe for breastfeeding? I think that's the question.
I didn't see that one. That might have been sent directly to you. I would say follow the manufacturer's instructions on the bottle personally.
Yeah, I would say anytime a client is pregnant or breastfeeding, we need to be really careful. And it's not because those things aren't safe. It's because we don't know. Because fortunately, I guess, it's not ethical to do research on pregnant or breastfeeding women because of, the implications of that. So there are so many things we just don't know. So I always, particularly with a hormone, because melatonin is a hormone, I would probably steer clear. And use other ways to support sleep, for example, or other ways to boost antioxidant activity or reduce inflammation. I see one question here too. There's a question about posting on social media and the post being taken down. How do we share information when it gets taken down so quickly? I don't know the context of that, if there is a bigger discussion around that.
I have seen discussion about this in the media, and you know, we've seen some people in, you know, allopathic and, you know, natural fields making wild, you know, claims and that sort of thing, and those things are typically now flagged in social media and taken down. So I think it's something, yeah, interesting times, and I think we're going to be learning as we go as far as how to navigate that. I mean, certainly we have to avoid, you know, wild claims or things that we just can't substantiate with research.
Okay, yeah, a few people are chiming in here. I have not found that to be my experience at this point. I am fairly active on social media, but I always use suggestive languaging and I never make direct claims. So that might be why I've escaped. But I think to me, that's really what it's like saying that may help with this or may have antioxidant activity. I think if you put the might or the may, like that changes everything. And then you're not saying this will support the immune system. It may. And it's unfortunate that that's happening because those things are actually true. Another question, am I allowed to share this info on my social media, educate some during these times, even though you're not certified? I think as long as it's clear that you aren't certified, that's the most important thing. As long as they know you're a student, then yes.
There was an additional question that was asked privately to the host, which is basically me. And I'm not sure if Matthew wants this to be shared, but Matthew, would you please ask that question directly to Christine Armstrong or Keyrsten McEwan? They're the two that would be able to answer your question. So
or in the group chat if you're okay with reading it out and sharing it here. Great, Matthew says, okay, good. Okay, and then this will be posted somewhere, Ed, yeah?
Yes, we'll be providing a YouTube link. Caleb and I are still working on the mechanics of it, but there will be a YouTube link. It'll also be on the Youth Education website as far as the learning management software, and then anywhere else that the rest of the administration would want it at.
Ed, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Caleb.
I will be sending an email to everybody who applied and participated in this webinar, telling them where to find this recording once it has been uploaded to the websites.
Amazing. Thank you, Caleb.
You now have the question from Matthew.
Okay.
Everybody
75-year-old client, no baseline blood test history, i.e. vitamin D levels, white blood cells, red blood cells, etc., to target nutrition. Recommending specific blood tests is a bit of a gray area and a bit outside of our scope, but I think that if you just have your clients circle back to their doctor and just have some general testing done, that will at least give you some information. But yeah, saying that like, I want you to go get this test is outside of our scope. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, any last minute questions from anybody? If not, we can sign off in a sec here. Okay. Anything else, Christine, that you had written down that we didn't cover?
I think that covers everything.
Awesome. Thank you for your help.
Thanks for the presentation.
Okay, thank you,